So I prepared a small set of issues that I was hoping, Jay, maybe you wanted to talk a little bit about the Azure Service Bus, maybe even demo something.
I can talk, but I'm not sure I have something to show.
That's okay.
I can prepare for next week if you want.
Yeah, sure. That will be great. Then I have some updates, and I'll just go through through them one by one. But let's start with Azure Service Bus. So I know you created a pretty cool PR that's been merged.
It's a.
Do you see it?
Yeah, yes. Again. On the middle, yes.
So this PR adds integration testing for Azure Service Bus activities, which is pretty advanced. It modifies the Azure Service Bus activities to use the workflow inbox. So this updates the Azure Service Bus activities to work properly.
Yes, this PR fixed some issue, and with this we are sure that we can use the receive activity to listen to subscription and to the same or different subscription, and be sure that we we can wait for a new message. And before, if we have two message received in the same workflow, the second message received takes the message in memory or in a workflow context already available. And this was because the activity directly takes the message from the context, and now we use the workflow message inbox that allow us to avoid any race condition when, for example, we need to send something outside and then immediately listen to a response. This scenario is available now, and we can also listening multiple time in a loop also on the different or same subscription. For my work, I have create other composite activity and one composite activity that send and receive in the same activity. And maybe I will propose other PR in the future, because maybe I will see a different kind or other kind of scenario to be able to receive with more performance or with more granularity when we need to listen specific subscription, or when we have a large number of message in one subscription and we want to dispatch in a multiple workflow or the same workflow.
That would be amazing. And so you're using it in a composite activity, and that works. So you're able to use the composite activity in your workflow, which contain the message received. So you are able to compose a more complicated composite activity and use. That's really cool.
Yeah, and the idea with this composite activity is to be able to create a complex message bus, Azure Service Bus, with a specific property regarding my need, because when I send this outside, the partner will use this specific property and keep this property, correlation ID, bookmark, etc., to send me a response, and then I use a receive the receive activity to be able to listen to this specific kind of message and correlate regarding my need. One thing, I have to create a new receive activity. I cannot use the same receive activity because I have upgrade the bookmark. I use another kind of bookmark, and today the architecture doesn't allow us to specify a custom bookmark and customize the worker to listen on the Azure Service Bus subscription. I don't know really how we can do this, but I think it would be really awesome to to be able to create some factory on or other thing to be able to customize the worker and the bookmark used when we need to receive message.
Yeah, it sounds like that will be good to look into, because this would also unlock some other potential use cases where we can reuse existing activities, but maybe inherit them into new, variations without having to copy all of the bookmark stuff, which is what you need to do in Elsa too, at least. If you wanted, for example, to create your own HTTP endpoint activity, you would have to also create your own workflow middleware, or the ASP.NET middleware components, the bookmark infrastructure for that activity. So maybe we can schedule a call separately from this call sometime soon, and we can dig into those details, just for me to get a better understanding of what you found.
Yeah, sure.
That would be great.
We remove all the mock usage, mock usage. That's good.
Yes, no more Moq. That's done. That's over. I was shocked actually when I saw the video. When I looked at that YouTube video from Nick,
Yes.
I thought, it's just clickbait, but
But
it was
at the first point, when I see your comment on the PR, I was on my mobile application, and I don't see the link. I just see, oh, we don't use Moq anymore. Okay, so good, but I don't understand, because we have Moq in different unit test projects. There is a package, and then I have seen the the link, and I say, oh my god.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, I like the library. It was so easy to use, but yeah, that's a real no-go.
Yeah.
And he did revert the change, so that's good. Although, there's this trust issue, because the reason he reverted it wasn't because he realized the error of his ways, at least, in my personal opinion, but he reverted it because of a technical issue on, I think, Mac or Linux or something like that. Chances are, once he figures that out, he's going to put it back in again. So yeah, very interesting. I recommend watching this in case people watching this recording and it's the first time they hear about it. Let me just include this URL so you can watch separately. All right. So that's enough about spyware. Let's yeah, but this is great work. I really like it. And let's schedule a call to dig into the bookmark factory thing you mentioned.
Yeah, sure.
All right, then what have I been up to for the past week? Many things, many fixes, many improvements. Few customers, they are digging deep into integrating Elsa and trying it out, and running into all sorts of issues. Some larger, most of them are very small, and which is great because it really improves the Elsa Studio, the engine. Small quirks are being solved, so that's pretty good. And speaking of Elsa Studio, I updated the All-in-One-Web project, which I want to show first. So let's see. So as some of you may know, we have bundles here, and then we have an Elsa bundle, which is just a package that's convenient for you to install in your own .NET Core application, but it's not an application itself. This is more of a bundled package. This one, all-in-one, that's both a workflow server and it hosts the dashboard. And up to this point, it was hosting the Stencil implementation of the dashboard. But now it's updated to host the WebAssembly, the Elsa Studio WebAssembly component. So what does that look like? The program is pretty much the same. So it installs Elsa workflow services. It also it still hosts Razor pages, so it can serve Razor pages. But it also now hosts Blazor framework files, and it falls back to hosts, which is this page here. And this has been updated to host a Blazor WebAssembly application. So in order for that to work, because this is an ASP.NET Core app, I created a Blazor WebAssembly application that then references the Elsa Studio packages specifically for Blazor WASM. We can actually update this a little bit to the later here. So the setup is quite easy, just standard boilerplate WebAssembly stuff. But of course, it also adds the Elsa Studio. So in case you're wondering how to figure that one out, there's documentation for that here. So there's a section called Elsa Studio Blazor WASM. And this takes you through all of the steps, including which packages to install and how to upload CS file. So that's this. So let's see how this works. So this is the WebAssembly, but it's hosted in AllInOne.Web. So all you would have to do is start this. Okay, so now it's listening on localhost 5001. As you can see, it's loading the Blazor stuff, and this is WebAssembly. And here we have a bunch of workflows. And just to remind you, everything is hosted in this one application, including the server and also, of course, the database. On top of that, I also updated the Docker file. So this is being deployed as a Docker image to Docker Hub. So the next, if you pull the latest version and you start this one, it should show the WebAssembly version. And actually, I didn't try it, so at least I didn't try to pull it from Docker Hub and then run it. So let's see if it actually ended up there. And for that, we go back to the documentation, and then here we have Docker. Let's see if this. Let's give Docker for desktop a minute to start. Oh, wow, that was pretty fast. Usually takes at least a minute. Well, I'm not complaining. Let's close this out. So try it again. This was unexpectedly fast. So it might have cached an older version. Let's see. So localhost. Yeah, this is an old version. Let's stop this for first. All right. So it's went ahead and it's pulling down the latest version. While that's doing, let's also double check the GitHub action for build and deploy all-in-one reference app. So it should contain the latest version. Let's see if it's the case. So here it started again, listening at port, well, 13,000. And there you go. So the Docker actually, yeah, the Docker image is also now using WebAssembly. So let's try a quick simple workflow. So we'll add the ASP endpoint and a response, hello from Docker. And since this is a monolith, so we should be able to use the same URL and then say API workflows. And there you go.
Oh, good. Very nice.
Yeah, that should, well, that takes everything up to, well, it moves everything to Blazor. And, well, it's part of the plan to phasing out the stencil implementation. All right, another nice improvement that has been made is as follows. It's here I called it direct output binding. And what does that mean? I will show you. So let's say we have a new workflow. Let's call it sum. So here I'm going to create a workflow that we're going to reuse as an activity. And this is important because this allows me to show the ability to send output from a workflow and then use it elsewhere. So let's say that we have this. So imagine we are creating a function that allows you to add two numbers. So we'll first define the inputs, just like we were creating a sum function. So we would have value A, and then the second one, which would be B. and the result will return the sum of those two values as the result. So we'll say result. All right. So first I'll show you what you would have to do before I made this little change. So that would be like this. You would have to first start off with a JavaScript to implement the functionality. So we would say get A plus get B. So here we would get the result, and then we would have to capture it in a variable. So we would say, let's say, well, let's call this variable 1 for now, because I'm going to remove it. And then we would select it here. So now when this executes, the output of this activity would be captured in the variable 1. And then to provide it to the output of this workflow and assign it to the result output, you would use the set output activity. And here you would select the output result and the value, which would be, of course, the value stored in the variable 1, like this. And that would be that. This would work. So now when you would use this activity in another workflow, let's publish this, and we'll create a new workflow. We'll call it calculator. Then we would be able to add the sum activity here, provide the inputs like 4 and 5, and the output we could now capture into some variable. And then we could write it out to the console. So here we would be getting the variable value, which would be assigned the output from sum. So let's save this, and then we execute it. And then we indeed see that this activity executed, and the right line printed the sum of those two. But the change that I pushed allows you to do it a little bit differently. So let's see how we can simplify this. So we'll start by deleting set output. We'll delete, and we can now directly assign the output of the JavaScript activity to the output as defined here. So it's now directly bound. So let's see if that still works. In the calculator, we still have this activity. Let's make sure it's pointed to the latest version that I just published, which is correct. So now when we execute this, we see that it still works. And we also see it only had to execute this one. And you can see that it, of course, also produced the sum as its output. So yeah, so it's a small change, but it's if you have many composite activities like this, then it's hopefully another enhancement is the ability to monitor and inspect workflow instances of workflows that were created in code. That wasn't possible before, but that's now fixed. So to give you an example, I'm gonna stop this one and start this one. So this is a different reference application, which is backend only, so it doesn't serve any UI. But here I prepared a little sample workflow. So this workflow is what I call a coded workflow. It's created in C#, and this uses the sequence activity and 3. So with this change that I made, we can at the very least see this workflow definition in the designer, even though it's not rendered properly because there's no designer support for the sequence activity yet. That comes later. But at the very least, we'll be able to close this one. Let me also start the studio. So notice that we have a workflow definition called sample workflow, and this comes from the C# code that I just showed you. And as you can see, the designer, it's very bare bones. It doesn't properly render. So this is called the fallback designer, which is invoked whenever you try to open a workflow whose root property is set to for which there's no designer support, and it will default to this one. But it's an extensible system, so we can add support for sequential work activities, but also things like state machine, and in the future even BPMN. So this is not very useful, but what is useful is at the very least you can start it. So I can press this button, and then we see the journal. So at least we have that. and now it's finished executing after the delay. And then we can look at the at the very least the information from each event. There's still a limitation because we can't actually select the activity and its child activities yet to inspect their state. But as I mentioned, that is a feature that will be coming later. So small improvement there. This is a request that has been asked for a couple of times. And this is in Elsa 2, as you may remember, we have signals and the ability to generate a URL to trigger a signal. And this simplifies the creation of workflows. For example, when you have a workflow modeling a document approval process. So we have it now in Elsa 3 as well. And for that, I prepared a very simple workflow called simple approval. And by the way, notice that I pressed zoom to fit the screen and it actually fits the screen. So it's fixed. It used to be not fixed. So for example, if you would have something like this, it wouldn't work. Of course, this is too small, but as you can see, it's still centered. This is a nice feature created by so yeah, so back to the simple approval workflow. So what we have here, we have a simple endpoint accepting requests at the documents path, which will then generate an HTML response, including two hyperlinks. One includes a approved link and a rejected link. But notice this function here, the create event trigger URL. That's a new JavaScript function. And what it will do, it will generate an absolute public URL that when invoked will resume this workflow using the specified event name here. So what we have here is when this is written back to the client, so the browser in this example, the workflow will block on the approved and the rejected event. So these are two activities of type event. And this one will wait for the approved event to be triggered and this one for rejected. And there are different ways to publish an event in Elsa. And now there's an additional way, which is through the URL that is created by this JavaScript function. All right, so here it will be blocking, and then depending on which URL or which link the user will click, it will either continue through this path or this path. So let's just try that.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Let's just try again. So we were here, and so this is the response of the workflow with the HTML that we just talked about. And then I clicked approve, and I will not click it again because it will not work. The workflow has executed already, but let me move forward. Notice that the URL here points to the trigger API endpoint using a shared access signature token that contains all of the information necessary to locate the proper workflow instance to resume and the activity instance to trigger, which is of course the append activity. So if we look at the backend and we go to instances, we see that the simple approval is finished, and we can see that it followed this path, the approved path. And you may be wondering what happens if you now go ahead and press rejected. Let's see what happens. So I go back and press and nothing happens. And this is the default behavior where it just responds with an empty response. You should be able to intercept this event so that you can customize the response you want to display, like in Elsa 2, where you can respond with maybe a message that stating that the link has expired or whatever makes sense in your scenario. That also means that the approve URL will no longer work. It will not have an effect because the workflow instance has completed. All right,
I have
so
one
that's
question here.
sure.
So does it mean that the event is creating a new HTTP context? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, sure. So as follows, let's look at this instance. So what happened when we invoked this HTTP endpoint, it created a new workflow instance, this instance here. Then it ended up here, and it wrote some response to the browser, and then it executed both this one and this one. And these two activities are blocking activities. So actually, let me show you. Let's go back here. Let me refresh. And so now I initiated a new instance. So let's look at that instance. It's suspended. And as you can see, it's waiting for either this signal or this signal. So what happens now when we click on one of these links? Let's take a look at the URL. So here we see it's gonna invoke either this one or this one, depending on which one we click. And this token, this serialized token, it's encrypted. So you cannot change it. If you change it, then it becomes invalid. It cannot be decrypted. But when this is invoked, this endpoint will execute. So here we have the endpoint implementation, listening at this path, and the request looks like this. It contains, one second, I think this is the wrong endpoint. Yeah, this is the correct endpoint. So there's an authenticated endpoint which requires you to have the proper permissions to invoke it, and then you can trigger any event. But this one here, this is specifically created to handle this URL. And so what it does, it gets the value of this T query string parameter, and then it's going to use a token service to try and decrypt the token, this one, into a thing called an event token payload, which is a simple DTO carrying the event name to be triggered and the workflow instance ID. So if that succeeds, we have a payload, that's this thing, and then we read the event name, the workflow instance ID, and then it simply uses the event publisher API to publish this event for this workflow instance. So that's step one. So it's going to do that. And because the workflow may execute in a virtual actor on proto-actor, for example, which could happen anywhere in the cluster. It could be the same cluster, could be the same node, but it happens outside of the HTTP context here. So for that reason, when we receive the result of that workflow execution, and that workflow execution happened to be running into a write HTTP response activity, which is actually the case here, this one here. This won't work properly, won't work at all in a virtual actor, of course, but that's okay. That activity was designed for that use case. It will just create a bookmark, which will be part of this collection here, this result of this collection of workflow execution results. And then the HTTP bookmark processor will process the results and resume all of those or any of those HTTP activities. So it will encounter this one or this one, depending on which one we triggered. And the HTTP response activity will then actually execute and, well, do however it was configured.
Well, I remember earlier that when you trigger the event from the API, you were getting a JSON response that tells you which activity was triggered and the workflow ID. So does it change now that the API itself will give you the response from the workflow?
Exactly. So it's actually the existing API is still here. So that's trigger authenticated. This one we have had for a long time. It hasn't changed. I just changed the folder name. So this still returns the JSON that you mentioned.
I see. So it's a different endpoint.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different endpoint. Yeah, this one accepts the event name as part of the route. That's more REST style, if you will. And this one is more of a, well, RPC kind of endpoint. It's called events trigger, but it's up to, well, this T parameter to be determined what event needs to be published. But to be clear, the existing endpoint, this one, it will still process any HTTP bookmarks. And if that workflow that has been triggered has a HTTP response activity, that will be sent to the client. And as you can see here, here's performing a check. So if response has started, then it will not send an. And actually, now that I'm looking at this, I'm wondering, will it will it still return the JSON? That may not be the case because I don't think it's actually returning the results. Which if you were actually expecting that, then I might have broken your use case. Let me check something quick. So here, let's create a quick workflow just for testing. Yeah, so it doesn't return anything. But to be honest, I don't recall if it used to return actual JSON response. If you've seen this happening before, then we need to talk if we want to revert that behavior or not, or make it configurable, because there could also be, well, I wanted to say there could be some security concerns because it exposes a lot of information, but at the same time, this is an authenticated call, so maybe that's not that big, that not a concern at all. But I would love to
No
hear
problem.
your thoughts on this.
I will double check again. Maybe I'm also not remembering it correctly, but I will check again.
Yeah, if you don't mind, that would be great. And
Yeah,
yeah, and, and if you've seen that it actually returns JSON, and if we get feedback that it's actually quite useful to get the workflow instance as a result, maybe let me also double check the difference between synchronous and async. No, so let's remove this. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference. So then we can always bring it back and make it configurable so that the users in control what response they prefer to send.
sure.
All right. So and then finally, lots of work has been done on the ability to create workflows that accept file uploads that you can then process, but also to write files back to the, and it supports zipping multiple files together into a single file. It even supports resumable file downloads. For example, if you are downloading a very large file from the browser, but then midway the connection drops, browsers have the ability to downloads if the server, the file server, supports file resumption, and that works now. So I've prepared two small demos. First, let's take a look at the new activity called HP file response. So this is a new activity. It works similar to the HTTP response, but is specialized in sending files. And we may consolidate this one into the HTTP response, but it's not certain yet, but we will see. Also, we'll also wait for user feedback. And one of the reasons we started out with a separate activity is because of the, the specialized nature of sending files to the client. For example, you can provide the file name that you want to use, maybe and of course this setting, the ability to enable resumable downloads, which is only really applicable for sending files to the client and maybe not so much when sending JSON. So let's see how this works. So here we have a simple standard HTTP endpoint listening at this path. And then when this executes, it will send the file to the client. And the file it will send depends on what you put in this content. It's of type object. And this makes it very flexible in terms of what you can put in. So here, for it as a simple example, I'm putting in a URL. So what this activity will do, it will first download this URL and then send that that file that it downloaded to the client. But it also supports things like streams and byte arrays and some class name whose name I forgot, but it's a simple POCO that carries the stream and some metadata like the file name and I think even the media type. So that's a POCO that you could manually instantiate here and customize some of the properties. And of course, if you have a stream in some variable, you can assign that to that object as well, and it will be downloaded as a file. So let's see how this one works. Download files from URL. Here we have Postman. So very simple request. So I'm now firing this request, so it should invoke that workflow. Took a little while because it's the file it's downloaded was 11 megabytes. So as I'll remind you, it was first downloading it from this source, and then of course the workflow sent it to Postman here, and then we have the audio file here. But it also works with multiple files. So here, as you can already see, I'm going to return an array. And now it's going to just download these two files, zip it, and send the zip to the client. So for this, I'm going to do send and download so that we can actually see that it's indeed a zip file. So it's going to prompt me to save. Did I not save it? Send and download, save, place. Well, it definitely exists. So I'm just not looking at this correctly.
Yes.
Oh, you
the
already
download folder.
It.
It's the folder up. It's not download folder. It's in your document. Yes.
Oh, nice catch. I didn't notice. So here we have zip file 15 megabytes. Let me move it into downloads real quick. And then unzip. And then we see those two MP3 files. All right, so that's the new activity to write files to the client. But we can also accept uploads. So let's imagine you want to receive files that are sent maybe from some form or your some application, and then you want to process that. So here we have an example. So for this, we use HTTP endpoint again, but this time it will accept files. So we support the post. We have some settings to validate the size limit of the posted file. So this is the request size limit. So if you were going to upload more than one file, maybe 10 files, the cumulative file size or the request size will be limited by whatever value put in here. But you can also limit the individual file size. So maybe you only allow up to a maximum of 5 megabytes, for example. And then you could have 3 files of a maximum of 5 megabytes if that were the limit. Of course, you can whitelist allowed file extensions, blacklist file extensions, and whitelist allowed MIME types. And then there's some advanced controls in terms of whether or not you want to certain errors. So let's say one of these validations fail. Do you want to expose that information, or do you just want to return some bad request with no additional information? So this is these decisions depend on your security requirement. But the simplest configuration is like this. It's just a path and support methods set to post. And then here, we're going to basically echo back the file. So here, instead of downloading files from some online source, here we're going to actually get the posted files, which I forgot to show, will be captured in this new output called files, which is of type form file, which is a ASP.NET class. And as you can see, it accepts an array of form files. So we can upload more than one if we want. And yeah, so that's going to be captured in this variable that I created here. So that's an of type form file or an array of form files. And then here we're going to just stream back the form files stored in the ops variable, right? So for that, I also prepared a small Postman request. So here I have just one file. This is empty. Let me remove this one. So here we hit send, and let's preview here. So as you can see, I uploaded this sample3 PDF, which it's just a PDF file, and it was just echoed back like this. And then, of course, we can upload multiple files, as I mentioned. So, for example, this file, now we hit send, and now what we get back is a zip file, which we can see if we look at the headers. We can see that the content type is application zip, and the file name is download.zip. I think that's it. I didn't show the ability to enable resumable downloads, but that works as well. And in order to actually try it, you need to mess around with the let's see, with these headers like if match. So this would then carry the entity tag that would be returned. This one you can ignore. So range and if match is what allows you to actually test parse.
It's good, but is for the HTTP endpoint activity, it's not. There is maybe too much parameter. We can do a lot, maybe too much thing with only one activity, because we use the same activity just to expose API with JSON or just simple text, and also to receive a file, to receive multipart, to receive a stream. And I don't know if it can be confusing for certain people. If you have something to receive in HTTP, use the HTTP endpoint and do what you want.
Yeah, very good point. And I agree, this is too cluttered. It's too much information, and it's more than just a UX concern. I agree, it could be confusing because you have so much things that you have to mentally go through and consider whether it needs configuration or not. One obvious solution could be to extract this into the counterpart of HTTP file response, which would be HTTP file endpoint, for example, so that you have a very clear single responsibility for that activity. So that's definitely something I will consider. My initial thought was to maybe move the file specific fields to a files category. So we would still have a single activity, but if you wanted to configure it for, for handling file uploads, then you would go to the files. But I kind of like the separate activity better because it seems to be a better fit mentally.
So
And
by default, will go ahead. No, just I want to know, by default, will it accept any file if there is an open HTTP endpoint and I try to upload a file, will it accept it, or do I need to enable file uploads?
Yeah, so you can always just send files to any HTTP endpoint, but it's up to the server whether it does something with it or whether it rejects it. So here in this case, so in this case, I didn't configure anything specific to accept files. So it will just handle files. Of course, I do capture the uploaded files in this variable. If you wouldn't do it and you would just now we can still send a file, but the array will be empty. So yeah.
But I think maybe this could be abused somehow. If I'm just opening an endpoint, I'm expecting a JSON, and someone just tries to upload even though I did not, specifically request a file upload. So it could be a potential to be abused in that case.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the question is, at which layer should this be prevented? Should it be the Nginx layer, or should we have maybe some default at the HTTP endpoint with a smaller or maybe application configurable request size limit? So here we have a request size limit, and that should be maybe set to by default. Maybe if the implementer doesn't configure anything, maybe it would be something byte, just for it not to be too small, but also definitely not too big to cause any issues without the user knowing upfront that this is possible. Once the user runs into the requirement of, hey, I actually need to be able to accept files of maybe 5 megabytes or whatever size, then they can configure it at the application level, configure it globally for all HTTP endpoints across workflows. Or
maybe we can have just a checkbox that says this activity can accept files, yes or no. And then if it is unchecked, then it will reject any type of file and just use a normal text body, this one or.
Yeah, and then I think that actually goes also back into the point that Jay made, where maybe it's better to have a separate activity, because then adding that activity explicitly already means you want to accept files. And if you don't use that activity, then we just need to update the middleware, I think, or something. We need to update so that we prevent users from sending arbitrarily large files to try and mess up the system. Because even without these changes today in Elsa 3, that's possible. You can just send whatever files you want, and of course it's up to the configuration web server you're using. So if there's if that's already limited to, let's say, 5 megabytes, then that's the maximum request size you make.
regarding this kind of parameter, I don't have take a look at the HTTP endpoint activity, but is there any event that are published when you use and when you configure an HTTP endpoint? Why I ask this is because we can use this kind of event to get the parameter of the property and be able to configure an out-of-process proxy, other things that route the data to the host, the Elsa host. And with this, we can take some and apply this kind of configuration on Nginx, reverse proxy, anything in Kubernetes to configure the HTTP layer.
Oh, so you're saying you want to be able to potentially control those layers like Nginx or in Kubernetes or whatever, maybe some proxy based on the configuration here. So the other way around. That will give the user a lot of control without having to depend on their IT administrator or DevOps engineer to widen those parameters.
I already do this in my host, but I have to use some trick to get the event when I publish the workflow and analyze the workflow, look at different activities, and maybe for some kind we talk about out of process hosting because there is the engine Beanstalk, and we host HTTP endpoint in IIS. And so there is some kind of out of process that are then able to run and start workflow orchestration of Beanstalk in the Beanstalk engine. And so I think about this kind of thing, be able to get events, get parameter, and programmatically configure other elements, other partner application partner like proxy that can host and be all the front access of the server.
So just to make sure I understand, you would be interested in updating those layers upon publishing the workflow, right? Not when the request is made. That is too late.
Yes. It's when I configure. Yes. So I already hook the publish event and save event. So, but I don't know if there is maybe a simpler way to do this because of specific activity.
Yeah, it's
because
a good question because this would be the second use case. For now, there's one use case where we also need to handle the workflow published event so that we can validate certain settings in this scenario specifically for HTTP endpoint as well, because we want to prevent users from configuring a path and method combination, which would potentially expose duplicate routes, similar to controller and actions. They have to be unique, otherwise you're going to get an exception for good reasons. So we wanted to implement some similar validation. So we have also that requirement, and I can take a quick look, see what it's done right now. I think it's probably something similar that you have done, but now that we have two such scenarios, one is for validation and the other one is for updating configuration in other layers, maybe it would be appropriate to provide a more easy to use API so that you can have let's say a filter or some handler that provides you with specific activities and their settings so that you can perform some specialized logic. Yeah, so here, for example, here's a request handler. Okay, so this is not a notification handler.
Yes.
Let me see. Okay, so here something is specifically invoking, and this is a problem because a request handler is, if I'm not mistaken, it's designed to handle to have just one handler to handle a specific request. So, and if that's true, then this needs to be changed to a notification handler so that we can handle, so we can have more handlers handling the shit. But setting that aside for a second here, yeah, probably you're doing something similar. So here we're getting all of the triggers, we're getting the publish triggers, and then we're gonna do some comparison and see if there's triggers having the same path and method. And if so, then we remember, yeah. So this contributor, he changed requests to allow to have multiple handlers. It's like yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm not too sure about this pattern, but that's a separate topic.
Okay. And just two questions on the designer here. You show, for example, a promote large message as outcome. It's not promote, but in the property.
Sorry.
Yes, in the property of the HTTP endpoint, you have a expose request to large outcome. It will add an outcome on the activity.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is by design or specific in the designer?
Oh yeah, so these settings are specific to this HTTP endpoint activity.
In the designer, or it's just a code code parameter in the activity?
Oh, I see. No. So it's I think it's specific to this designer. So I don't think it's
Okay.
I'm not sure though. Let me just double check. Do you think something like this would be useful for other scenarios and other activities? Because then it might be worth turning this into a way that you can declare it on the activity implementation itself, so you don't have to create a custom UI hint or whatever is used here.
Yes, I think it is.
Then in that case, we need a new issue, I think. But let me just confirm. So here, what we have. Okay, so these expose properties, they are actually properties here.
And these property are not. It's not input of bool. It's just bool.
Yeah, it's
Boolean?
just bool indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, because I didn't think it makes sense for this to be scriptable or using dynamic expressions, so that's why it's not an input.
Okay, understand.
Yeah. Let's see if it's used in code. Yeah, of course. So if those expose properties are enabled, then whenever just looking at in a specific example, let's say the request was too large. So then, of course, if the system determines that the request is too large, then it's gonna schedule the activity associated with this outcome. So that's how it's used here. But what we want, what you were asking about, is if it's if there's a possibility to, so that you can just set maybe some property on input or maybe use a different attribute, whatever, so that you don't have to also do the following, which I think is special code just for HTTP activity, but we want to make it then reusable. With these things, as you check these boxes, and you will want to make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, then you need to create a thing called activity port provider, and then and this is actually a simple interface that you implement just to provide the ports you want to the designer. And here it's based on those settings.
Okay.
But surely we can come up with a system where you can declaratively configure this behavior just on the backend side using attributes and whatnot.
Okay.
So do you want me to create an issue and assign it to your name, or do you want to create an issue and assign it to somebody else?
Okay, I will create the issue. And maybe the HTTP, the last question is the HTTP file response. Maybe if I understand, when you put directly an URL, this activity takes this URL, call the endpoint, and stream this endpoint to the client. Yes.
So actually, this will download the URL, and then so it will download it, and then that stream will be used and copied into the response stream.
So maybe it could be good to have some security parameter, authorization, that we can customize if the endpoint, the URL is secured by anything.
You mean this one?
No, the HTTP file response.
So can you
or maybe
walk
I
me
don't understand which activity gets the MP3 stream?
this one? This one will get the
So there is an HTTP client in this activity that calls
Yes.
the URL. So if the endpoint is secured.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So that's the scenario where you indeed want to download something from a protected resource and then stream it back here. In that case, just accessing the URL wouldn't work because you also need to include some authorization. Yeah, that would have to be done. That's not currently the case, but I think we should wonder if we want to take it that level, or if it would be better to have a separate, maybe just a more specialized HTTP request, which
Yes.
which does allow you to provide authorization, credentials, and then this will download the file, provide it as a stream as part of the result here, or maybe we'll even add another output, or maybe we'll create a download file activity. That remains to be seen. But then you have more control, and that including authentication, and the output will then be used by the HTTP file response. So we can keep this one relatively simple.
And that's a really good point. And if we use an HTTP request and then attach the response message to the a new activity HTTP response, can we do today maybe not an HTTP file response, but the HTTP response directly, because the HTTP request will do the get of the resource. Is the string can be directly passed to the HTTP response?
Yeah, I understand the question, and the answer is yes, that will be possible. It's just that the HTTP file response has more control over specifically the ability to zip together files, so that's specific to files, and the HTTP response doesn't have this logic, although we could consolidate the logic that we have here into HTTP response so that this handle JSON responses, file responses, and even multiple file responses by zipping them together. But then it would also, of course, implement resumable downloads. So the responsibility of this one will become a little so and it also means that's the other way around of what we discussed earlier about HTTP endpoint and moving out these settings into a HTTP file endpoint, if you will. Similarly, here we would go the other way around, where we say, well, let's merge these two into one, which is possible. Technically, it's, from the UX point of view, it wouldn't make this one much more complicated because it would just enable resumable downloads. But yeah, also entity tag, file name, content type is already part of HTTP response. And we could consider adding a separate tab just for handling file responses if we think that's a good idea, as opposed to having separates. But yeah, so other than that, the HTTP file response, its main concern is not so much the ability to download a file so that it can stream it back. It's just one of many sources find the stream from in order to send it back to the client. And that particular logic is very specific to this one. And yeah.
Okay.
But that's a lot of food for thought in terms of how to best organize these activities. Should we have fewer activities with more functionality, potentially compromising on the UX and confusing the users a little bit? Or should we move the other way around, where we have smaller activities that are more specialized in certain behavior? Yeah, I think that's some those are some good questions to ponder.
I think the ability to handle files is really useful, and many scenarios will really require it. So specialized activity is helpful here. But the question comes that if I can do it with two activities, then why combine it? That could be the point where we need to think about. But having an activity that can handle files for the less technical users, it is really useful because it will reduce lots of burdens, how to put the proper content type, proper file size, and all of these things, which is a little bit tricky. So it's really useful to have this ability.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because it's true, an HTTP response, download files, on HTML web pages, document, everything can be done using this thing. But within this context, yeah, we have to wonder if it's too much. So yeah, let's give that some more thought. And anyone who's watching this and you have some strong opinions, I would love to hear all about it. And I think before we sign off, let me just show you quickly the write HTTP file HTTP response implementation. So here we have write response, and what it's going to do, it's going to get a list of downloadables. What is a download? A downloadable is a source from which it can get the system can get a stream. And let's take a look at a few of them. So as you can see here, we have an innumerable of iDownloadable content handlers, and then we have these implementations. So we have one that can provide binaries. So those would be byte arrays. A downloadable content handler, which produces a downloadable object. And then we have form files, a handler that can handle combining multiple files into a single zip stream, a handler that can just return a stream, and one that can handle the URL. And this one is what I wanted to show. So this, as you can see, it's just one kind of handler, and it will, before it can return a downloadable object, which, just for your information, it consists of a stream, the file name, content type, and any e tag for caching. So this particular handler will then where is it? Here, it uses a service called file downloader. So that's basically the wrapper around an HTTP client, and then uses its response to get the stream. So it's going to read the stream, and that stream is then returned as part of this downloadable object. So all handlers return a downloadable, and of course this is extensible in the sense that you can write more handlers. Yeah, and if you look at the implementation of just the write file HTTP response, it's substantive. Is that a word? Anyway, and if we could merge it into the write HTTP response, which makes this like a really big, powerful HTTP response activity that you can configure in all sorts of way, but it would be potentially hard for users to use. But at the same time, I do like this idea that having a HTTP response that you can configure exactly as you need it to be, but it's a very low level, very advanced activity. To make it easier for users, what we could then do is have a set of pre-configured HTTP responses, potentially using the activity type provider mechanism. So we have a single activity in code, but we would have multiple logical activities, which are just pre-configured instances of the HTTP response activity. And then you would see them, well, here in HTTP, you would see all of these logical activities here, but the UI, their input would be limited to, well, that particular use case. I don't know. It's just a potential avenue to, because after all, there is some overlap between HTTP file response and HTTP response, just to look at the content type and content, for example, and response headers as well. So yeah, I think that was a lot. Thank you for attending. Do you have any questions before we sign off, Ali, Jay?
No, it's okay for me.
Yeah.
All right.
Just a small question. This auto layout function, is it already implemented or?
No, it's waiting for you to do it.
All right. Okay. So let me check that.
Great. And if you want to check something, notice that these lines here, as you can see, it doesn't move right. So and there are several ways we could solve this. And actually, let me just spend 2 minutes talking you through it, just to feed you with some questions and maybe some food for thought. One of the solutions is what we have in Stencil today, where these ports they auto rotate. So if this one is here and this one is there, then this port would be destroyed and recreated here in the middle or somewhere, and then the lines would be more closer to one another, and this one would be destroyed as well and recreated here, so that we have a shorter path. And that works, but the implementation is really complicated and it's hard to maintain, and I don't understand it. It was a contribution from somebody else, and I'm happy that it was there because it's a better UX in my opinion, but I would prefer to have a different implementation. Speaking of which, another solution could be where you configure the the layout direction, I guess you could call it. So you would have a direction, and then it's either horizontal or vertical, or even maybe top to bottom, left to right, right to left, and bottom to top. Could be options. And then you just configure it, and then your entire layout of your workflow is supposed to be in that direction. So currently, the default layout or the direction is left to right, as you can see. Inputs go here, outcomes come here. But if we switch that setting, then it could be um, top to bottom. So inputs go here, and here would then appear the outcomes. Very simple implementation, and could be almost as effective, if not even more so. So that's a potential option. And there was something else. Let me see.
So what you suggest is we can place the activity where we want, but we choose a pattern in one box of an activity to say input are on the left and output are on the right, or top bottom for each activity.
Oh, no, yeah. So actually, that's not what I was talking about, but that's also interesting. But let me first clarify what I was actually talking about. I was thinking about a workflow level setting. So you would have one setting here where you select the direction, and that would affect all of the activities. So all of these input ports would appear at the top, for example. But what you're suggesting could be an idea as well. It would be a bit more work for the designer, because now they have to go to the settings and then change the setting. And if they don't like it, they change it again. And they have to do it for each of them, instead of just changing it once. And then, of course, then you are stuck with that particular direction. But of course, you can change the direction. The limitation is just you are always going in one direction. You cannot go from left to right for a while and then maybe break onto the next row, if you will, and then it would work, but the lines would not be as nice.
Yeah.
So that would be a limitation.
But the idea is to keep the ability to place the activity with free.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can always, regardless of those settings, you can always position your activities however you like. It's just how these ports would be positioned so that the lines between them, the connections would appear more clean, if you will, more optimized.
Sure. Okay.
So that was the second option, and what you proposed could be a third option. I think maybe the best option would be a combination of the following, which I will show you, if I can find it.
Is it possible to drag these ports? Can it be made that I can manually move them?
Well, you're Ali, you're jumping the gun. That's where I wanted to go. But yes, you can. Okay, since jumped the gun anyway. Let me show you what you. No worries. No worries.
It's too slow.
We're too slow for you. It's too fast. But yeah, so with these things, you can have a lot of control over how you position these things. So I think this we want to add in any case. Right now you can do it, but it's not persisted. So we need to update the connection model so we store this information so that it can be used by the designer to be redrawn, reconstructed in this way. But this is going to be added regardless of the directionality stuff. But I also think that together with the auto rotate and the ability to do this and the ability to, if the X6 designer supports it, the ability to move the port itself elsewhere. So you can have manual control over moving this a little bit here and this a little bit there. But that would depend on the X6.
Because, for example, a switch activity, maybe you can make it like a rectangular shape and then have from the top, from the middle, from the bottom, multiple paths. It will
Exactly.
make more sense. Or if you are doing the BPMN style of workflows, then you really want to use all of them.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of gateways in BPMN, where you have little diamond, yeah, and that would give you a lot of visual control. Let me quickly find the thing I wanted to show. This one, auto orienting flow ports. So here I outlined the options that I had in mind. I will update this with what we just discussed, just to have more options written. And here's an animation of what we have in Stencil, more or less. So these things, they rotate automatically. I think that would be nice, at least to be able to enable this behavior so that you don't have to manually draw these connection. This comes from an actual implementation here as a POC, and then you can see it in action. And this is the X6 library, and the idea is basically to handle, basically to handle the moving event of a given node, because then here it's gonna see, okay, what are my attached neighbors? So let's say this is the node being moved. This is the attached neighbor, I think, or maybe it's referring to these ports, I don't know. But it's gonna get some neighbors, and for each neighbor, it's gonna determine the distance, I suppose, and then use some math to determine the position of these ports, and that's this logic here. So ideally, we can just copy this more or less, and then it works. But I don't know. Maybe there's some hidden complexity that's not immediately apparent from this thing here. But yeah, just wanted to tell you, Ali, if you don't have anything to do this weekend, I got some ideas.
Can you post the link in the chat? I will try to refer it.
Yes, of course. So let me share this link, and this will take you to the rest. So here you see this issue referenced. Let me put this here and also put it in the chat. All right, now I'm done. Okay, guys, then thank you for joining again, and have a great evening, and I will see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.